Hello, hello, hello.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome to the Buzzzy Spaces event. We're happy you've joined us for this month's topic, Conquer Your Projects in 2022. At Buzzzy, we continue to look for ways to better organize and structure our processes. So we're excited to learn with all of you on how to stay on track and master productivity. Uh, if this is also a New Year's resolution for you, you're in the right place. We're joined today with Celimar Acevedo. And so thank you, Celimar, for being here. So let me just give you a quick intro and then we'll get right into it. Uh, so Celimar has over 6 years experience as a project manager and more of a decade of strategically supporting teams and key organizational objectives. She holds a bachelor's from University of Puerto Rico and is a project manager professional and a certified Scrum Master. Her experiences across product, technology, innovation, government, and marketing. She believes you don't need to be the most organized person to be productive. You just need to make sure you can achieve your tasks. Super profound. Thanks, Aliman, for being with us. You've been a great resource for us and bouncing things off of you as far as from our processes and anywhere from some of the client interactions that we've had that, as you know, have been super interesting. So, how about we start with your role? For those that don't know, what is a Scrum Master? What does a Scrum Master do? And give us some insights there into your day to day.
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, thank you for having me today. I was really looking
Of
forward to this.
course.
So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me. So a Scrum Master, I get this question a lot. So basically, a Scrum Master is a facilitator, right? We are there to remove roadblocks from usually high performing teams. So anything that has to do with helping teams make self-organize, right? Make sure that they focus on the right things and minimize waste. That's basically what a Scrum Master does, right? We remove roadblocks. We create relationships between the team, especially development teams, and stakeholders, product owners, etc. So if there is ever a problem within a team, we're not there to tell the team what to do, but we're there to make sure we remove all roadblocks, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think I found Scrum Masters just to be kind of, like you said, those relationship builders, the great facilitators. Y'all have very great leverage because y'all know, you know very well, you know, your team members. So for us, right, we work with freelancers, and freelancers may not have someone like you in their corner. Sometimes they work with clients that may not have a PM on that side. So, what would you say for them? How can someone who typically doesn't manage their own work, how can they improve on their day to day tasks?
So I would say something as basic as having a to do list. It sounds super basic, but it's super important. That is something that I use on my day to day. And the other thing I would say, you have to learn how to prioritize the tasks that actually matter. We can't do work just for the sake of doing work. We have to do work that matters. Because if not, at the end of the day, you're just going in spirals and you're not focusing on the things that actually matter and that will move you forward. So forget about the things that are just like business as usual and focus on the things that will move you to that next step. So the to-do list and learning how to prioritize, that for me has been like key to make sure we always hit our goals and focus on the things that matter.
Yeah, it definitely is so simple as just like coming up with a list of things to do and crossing them off. There's sometimes a sort of satisfaction with that. We'll get into more of the priority side because I think that's an interesting topic for a lot of people. But for us, we have several creatives that work with us across content design. We're interested, what behaviors have you found are successful among your creative colleagues, whether it's your team now or in the past?
Right. So I think I would say the time that I was working with marketing people or the time that I was working with product designers, I found that their commitment to the overall goals of a specific project or initiative was really key to push things forward. If you're working with someone that doesn't really believe in the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, things are going to be 10 times harder. So for me, creatives are they are a powerful resource, but they need to be committed to the vision. If not, it really doesn't go anywhere. So once you see that they have commitment, they believe in the goal, they believe in the company, they really move forward and definitely create magical things. I would say.
Yeah, no, we found a lot of that in our interviews of how creatives they'll take on projects just because it's a passion of theirs and they believe in the mission, and that
Mhm.
really makes a huge difference, really in their overall motivations. On the flip side, though, right, as we do work with businesses as we're two-sided business, how can small business owners better organize to make sure they fulfill their tasks? And you talked a lot about prioritization being so important. What are some things that they can do?
Yeah, and to your point, I cannot stress enough the importance of prioritizing. You have to prioritize the work that matters, because there is work that just gets you by. There is your daily to-do list that is, it's just a bunch of stuff that gets the business by but doesn't really matter. It keeps us operational, right? But if
Mhm.
you learn to prioritize the work that actually moves you forward and allows you to evolve and allows you to scale, I think that's what differentiates businesses from evolving, from businesses that just keep doing the same and don't really scale, right? So prioritizing, it that word gets thrown around a lot, but it's really important. From a project manager perspective, I can tell you that if we are not able to prioritize our portfolio as a company, we never get anywhere. So that I would definitely stress how important prioritization is.
100%. It keeps the team accountable, right? Just to
Yeah.
kind of see like this is where we're headed and this is everyone's role into completing this project.
Absolutely.
Yeah. With us recently or throughout, the inception of Buzzy, we sometimes we can forget to discuss certain things in negotiation phase. We found that as freelancers and as business owners now. So there's moments where we wish we would clarify or things that we've learned before beginning the work. What questions should a freelancer ask before and throughout the project that you would typically ask if you were that project manager in the room with them?
Right. And I think now we're getting to the core of what I do on a daily,
Yes.
right? So three things that are super important for me and that I make sure we always ask with every single one of our initiatives. It doesn't matter how big the initiative or how small the initiative could be, but it's super important right from the get-go. You ask, what is the scope? Is it defined? And what is your definition of success? Not my definition of success as a project manager. I'm talking about the stakeholders' definition of success. So if this is what you're requesting, let's make sure that we are all aligned in the scope. It's defined, because if it's not defined, we're gonna have to do double the work, right? It's not bad to start with a project that is not necessarily fully defined, because we also have to have the ability to adapt and iterate. But um, but as we go along, we need to make sure that we continue um, to filter out those requirements. We need to give the scope, the shape it requires. So we finally get to a point where, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the definition of what we're trying to achieve here, and this is what success looks like. Because everybody's definition of what success is for a specific project is super different. So my VP might think that success looks like something. My director may think that success looks like another thing. So it's really key to have everybody aligned and make sure that we all understand what that is going to look like.
Yeah, and it keeps them accountable, right? Because they may have not even thought of it when you ask them that question,
Mhm.
what success mean to you? So it's super important. And I love that you mentioned those three. Two of those three we actually have ingrained in our product. So we do ask users when they fill out a request form, what are the goal in this? And really that helps the freelancer really get to know, what's the end goal here? What am I working towards for this project owner? And we do ask at the very end, what is the definition of done? Which is really what does success look like for this to be launched. So that's great. I'm glad that we're aligned there because we've definitely done a lot of research on how would PMs work at this and how can we kind of digitize that and make that into the technology. So you mentioned a lot about scope as well, and things come up, right? Like sometimes we can't control that. Throughout a project, priorities can kind of shift. Some tasks might come up that we never planned for. How do you deal with changes in the scope of a project? What are your tips to work through them, whether it's as an individual or as a team?
That's a very good question because on a personal level, I can tell you that I hate change. Like I absolutely despise it. But obviously on a professional level, it's my day to day. That's
Yeah.
my bread and butter. It's what I do. So I can tell you that there isn't a day that goes by that priorities are not switching. It's part of the job. And I would say that the magic here is your ability as a project manager or as a person that is leading an initiative, your ability to adapt to change and how do you pivot. That is key. Um, if I have to choose my weapon, like what I call my weapon of choice, I have two things: the changelog document and paper trails. I know that in an agile environment, we tend to work fast, and sometimes documentation is frowned upon a little bit. So, but I would say that there are key documents and artifacts that you need to have um, that will eventually help you keep everything organized. So the change log is one of my key documents. I have to have changes documented. I need to know who owns the change, who requested the change, who approved it, because it brings visibility. And to your point of what you were saying
Mhm.
earlier, it brings accountability. This is not something that I, the project manager, invented or pull out of nowhere. This is something that somebody requested and somebody approved. So if later on we for some reason we have an issue and somebody asks, well, who approved this, why did we do this, well, here is proof. This was approved, this was reviewed by a change management um that has a name, I'm sorry, a change management board.
Mhm.
Um and and we moved forward because it was approved. So same thing with paper trails. You always want to have everything written down. And funny enough, I didn't learn that from any like project management class or like at college or anything like that. It was someone that used to tell me, you have to write everything. You have to keep everything writing. So that's something that I live by. If it's not on paper, it didn't happen. So you want to protect yourself, you want to protect your teams because a lot of things fall through the cracks in an organization. So you want to make sure that you have that whenever you need it, because things change on a constant basis. Every day things are changing, because priorities are changing. Nobody thought that we were going to have COVID, right, 2 years ago. So
100%.
organizational priorities, organizational objectives had to change. So that's something that you leverage your change management framework for. And what can I tell you? There's many ways that you can deal with change, but your ability to adapt and pivot and maintain a record, that's super important and that's key.
Yeah, documentation is so important. I can only imagine with COVID how more important it's been, right? Because you can't tap someone on the shoulder to ask, why did you do this? Or how did this get done? And you mentioned with documentation too and the changes that could happen. Teams change, right? You have people that could leave your teams or move on to different opportunities. And if they're long and gone, you just don't know what they did, then you're kind of shit out of luck, right? You really need that documentation. So I think that's been super important. Our end for like scope changes, we try to avoid them as well. Like again, like you mentioned, personally we hate it, but professionally, we have to deal with it, and we just try to do as much research as possible into like the different products that we want to build beforehand and make sure we talk to the right people. But of course, scope changes do happen. So you mentioned really having to facilitate, right,
Mhm.
communication at times. So in your role, I'm sure you deal with several stakeholders. Can be an engineering manager or even business leaders. Could be C-level at any level. What are your best practices and really communicating the prioritization and any changes that may occur? What are your tactics really in negotiating and communicating the importance of any changes that may happen?
Right. So that will always depend on what you're working on and who you're working with, because different teams have different priorities. So I can tell you that my previous role, when I was like a more junior project manager, I had to adapt our initiatives, our vision, and all of that to whatever that little team was. Um, Now, being more on a leadership team, it's a whole different ballgame. So now the negotiation, the prioritization is completely different. It's a different framework because I'm dealing, my team is dealing with things that affect the entire organization. So in here, it's like, okay, what is priority? What's gonna get us the money? It as simple as it sounds. It usually comes down to that, right? What are the things that align to the business objectives? What is the thing that is getting us the money? That is always going to come first. Um, and usually when people don't agree, you have a group of stakeholders that don't necessarily agree, like, hey, this is priority. No, my thing is priority. Because that's another thing. In an organization, and I know you guys obviously are focused more on the perspective from a freelancer, but you are still working with a business, right? So in businesses, somebody is always going to have a priority because they only care about their goals, right? So it's strange, but at the same time it's not, when you are in the middle of different, like, conflicting priorities, right? You have the operations team has a priority, the financial team has a priority, and you're like, okay, what am I going to do here? So usually that leads to having a conversation to help each other understand where we are all coming from. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, everything, yes, everything might be a priority, but what is really, really the thing here that will get us to, like, will give us a quick win, right? What is the thing that we can achieve here that will have the biggest impact, first and foremost, um, but that it's feasible enough that it's almost a guaranteed win, right? So it's having those conversations. It's give and take. Like, what can we move out of the roadmap so we can insert this other priority, and how am I going to help you bring it back once we are finished with this one? So yeah, it's all about difficult conversations. I have to say they are
I'm
very
sure.
difficult conversations,
Yeah.
but it's the way it goes.
Yeah,
And
it's always interesting conversations to get like all those stakeholders in a room, and then they see, this person comes to bat with all of this context, right? Like you said, I can get this a quick win with this work, and then someone kind of has to fall back and be like, all right, now I see what the other person is working on. I kind of do have to align, I guess, to the overall, right, the company's objectives. On our end, we do like outcome-based roadmaps, so we're kind of looking at the impact of the work that we'll do towards that overall objective for really, well, right now we're focused on this year. So that's very interesting there. I think I want to get your point of view on this. I think this is interesting. We're right now right in the midst of the great resignation right now. Employees are leaving their jobs to have better lifestyles or sometimes better jobs, right, that can offer better mental health benefits. I want to get your point of view as a project manager. How do you manage possible burnout from your teammates or your colleagues?
yeah, and it's a very difficult thing. It's a very good question because it's a very difficult thing to manage. You can manage your own um, stress, and but
100%.
it's very difficult as a leader or as a person that is, yeah, leading an initiative or a project or a group of people. It's difficult um, tell people not to worry about something, right? Or because at the same time, there's a balance. You want to be assertive, you want to make sure everybody understands the importance of the work that they're doing. You keep everybody accountable, um, but at the same time, you also want to be mindful of people's different working styles. Um, I can tell you, to be completely transparent, I am a workaholic. And I put myself in stressful situations knowingly. Like I and I shouldn't be doing that, right? So I don't want my teams or the people that are working with me. I don't want them to say. I want them to have a good work life balance. I want them to disconnect after I don't know 6, 5, 6
Mm-hmm.
um, because the work is always going to be there. Um, and family time and all of that, you're never going to get that back. So I strongly believe that as a leader, I need to make sure that people are having a good work life balance because my leaders do it with me, right? They tell me all the time, you shouldn't be working at midnight. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
um, but at the same time, it's a difficult thing. It's a balance. The only thing I can do, honestly, whenever it's not up to me to make the decision on whether or not a person's capacity or bandwidth could use some release, right, or use some more time or less work, the best thing I can do is escalate. I don't see that as much from a project management standpoint, but as a scrum master, it's something that it's definitely there, especially when you're working with high performing teams and development technology teams. You can I've witnessed a lot of engineers work overtime, burn themselves out. So I would always escalate to their managers. It's like, hey, but bring the data. I have to have the data. I cannot say, hey, Michael over there, he is at capacity. He cannot finish the sprint for next week if I don't have the data. If I'm not showing that that resource is actually at capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to escalate because I want to help the team, I have to have the data to back it up and present the information that basically shows like, hey, we need an extra resource. We need to have another developer join the this team, things like that, right? So if it's my team, I'll buy them coffee. I'll bring donuts, cultural things, right? Like to bring up the a change in the environment. But if it's definitely not up to me, I have to talk to their managers and see what I can do there.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the nail right there. Like culture, it's trying to make a great culture, great environment while we're working, but also a great enough culture where people can raise a flag and or
Yeah.
or feel comfortable enough to really say like I gotta opt myself out next week or something like that.
Hmm.
I think it comes down to really another thing. If anyone has the privilege of having someone that you trust on your team to have check-ins when, I think those are great. I'm lucky to have Nina on our side. It's funny how you mentioned how you and your colleagues can kind of go back and forth and really know each other enough to say, hey, you look like shit or you're burnt out, right? And I think for me and Nina, we definitely hold each other accountable to know, like, if we're not working at our highest level, we should definitely push each other to take that time off. And it's crazy how you mentioned developers do have this sort of um, sort of this mindset, right? Or there's a stigma to like overwork themselves. And I saw an
Hmm.
interesting post recently that was, would you rather work for 20 years straight, right? Like all in 20 years um, to get just 10 years off? Or would you rather work 60 days to get just 30 days off? I think that's a pretty powerful question to really think about on how we should be managing our time and what's really important to us. I think mental health and self-care is definitely should be at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And really, so one thing, another part of really that can be a help, right? A tool that I don't think we use enough of is delegation. It's really hard for us to delegate. Sometimes it can be seen as a weakness, right? Or it's hard to trust someone else to do something as well as us, or to really teach a peer. Tell us, what's your secret when it comes to delegation?
I don't have a secret because I suck at it. No,
Tell us the
to
importance of it
be
for sure, so that we
completely
know.
transparent, I am so bad at it. But I think the root of the problem when you're bad at delegating, it lies on how much you trust your team. Um, I'm not saying that I don't trust my team right now, but it was a learning curve at the very beginning, because joining a company in the middle of a pandemic, um, working remote, I would say I'm not a fan of working remote. I have to say that, and that's one of the reasons why. Because when you don't have that, the time to collaborate in person with your teams, there's a certain, I don't even know what to call it. There is a certain relationship that develops
Mhm.
when you are in the same place. And unfortunately, uh, at the very beginning in the role that I am right now, that was difficult because I
Okay.
didn't know them. They didn't know me. How am I going to like trust them to do the stuff that they need to do? I don't know. I don't know their working style, things like that, right? So it was difficult, and I realized that hey, this is coming down to the fact that I don't trust them. But later last year, I got an intern, and that completely changed because I was like, well, I have an intern. So now this is someone that I need to not
You have to
only,
delegate.
yeah, not only I need to coach her, I need to guide her, but I also need to give her work. And, and it was a weird situation because I was like, it's not that I don't trust her, but I don't want her to mess up. So because she was my intern, I cared about her. So it was a difficult thing to manage, but at the end of the day, I think we did good. I told myself like, hey, if you don't delegate these things, then it's going to hurt your performance because those are things that you can't, like, you don't necessarily pay too much attention to, but they have to be done. So focus on the things, like I said before, focus on the things that matter, that are priority to you, and then those that are business as usual, get operational things, delegate them, and just make sure that you create a relationship with the team that you're delegating to, where, like you said before, they're able to raise their hand like, hey, I don't know how to do this, or hey, I cannot
Mhm.
do this, or I'm not getting any traction. I went over to this other team, and they're not listening to me because I'm not you. That happens a lot actually.
Mhm.
And it's like they don't want to give me this stuff because technically they don't know me, or they haven't worked with me, they only work with you. So that's when I have to come in and be like, hey, this person is working with me. um, I push this task to them, so they'll be able to support you any areas where I'm not able to support you at the moment because I have other projects that I have to focus on, right? So trust, it's all about the trust.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does, yeah, it comes down to trust relationships. Like if you don't know someone, then you're less likely to ask for help. So I think it's super important to really keep up with those like relationship building initiatives, even if we're remote, as I'm sure many companies are right now, given the new spread that's going on right now. So we're interested in this question here. It's a little bit of a fun one because when we did interviews with a lot of freelancers, we learned a lot from them that developers were asked to do a lot of design tasks. They're not designers. Designers, vice versa, are asked to do things like web development. They're not developers, right? They're designers. So we're curious to hear what are some things that PM does not do that you have been asked to do throughout your career?
You know what? It's similar to what you just said. I've been asked to do things that are not my job.
Okay.
And and I still deal with that sometimes, as far as as far in as far as I am in my career. I still deal with things like that. Um and I think people, and I can't tell you why because I don't really know. I haven't been able to figure out why this happens, but sometimes people's perception of the project manager is like, oh, when it comes to the execution, they will do this. And then the assumption that I will do something that is not really up to me. That's why it's super important that at the beginning, when you're scoping your projects, when you are defining roles and responsibilities, everybody understands what is it that they're going to do. But funny enough, even if I do that, sometimes you still have people that forget about that. So
Mhm.
it's like you have to constantly remind them, hey, these are the roles, these are the responsibilities. This part right here, that is not my job. Obviously, you're not going to tell them like that, um, but you have to find a way of reminding them that, hey, this right here, this is under your scope of work, your responsibilities. Please let me know if there's anything that I can support you with, anything that I can help you with to get some traction here. But it's really funny how some people think that you are also going to do the execution of the project. Not only you're managing it, but you also have to execute it. And at least I don't have that problem when it comes to technology projects because they know that I'm not going to line a write of code. I'm not going to write a line of code.
Or deploy it or anything like that. That's so
Right?
funny.
Like, no way. I don't know Python. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. So, but yeah, that is the most difficult part when you have to remind people what their responsibilities are within a specific initiative. Right?
But I like your advice. Just kind of write it down, right? Have like a stakeholders list and have everyone's role defined. It's funny because in sports, it's like that, right? You would never question, who's a quarterback or who's a wide receiver, who's different roles, right? Are on the field. It's really outlined for each person. So I guess it's something we can take from that playbook when it comes to managing our businesses.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So I'm going to give you the floor right now, Celimar, because this is something we've been thinking about a lot in the last few months. And obviously, this is a question that maybe startups have as well. Why should businesses invest in a project manager for their team as they continue to scale and grow the number of stakeholders that they're dealing with on a day to day?
So I would say, um, and I always argue this with people that don't necessarily think that everything needs a project manager. But at the end of the day, we are all project managers. It's like from the moment you wake up, you're making decisions and you're planning your day out, right? At least the average person does. So when you have a business, even if it's a small business, you need people to keep everybody accountable. Um, you need people to help you stay in track. Now, please understand that a lot of people would think that a project manager's job is very superficial and it's almost like administrative and oh, a secretary can do that, an executive assistant can do that. Not necessarily, because there is a framework behind it. There is a reason why we get certified, right?
Mhm.
And it's a very, very, very difficult test. It's the worst test I've ever taken. Um, yeah. um, so there is a reason why it's so difficult to get certified, and because there is a framework behind it, and that framework is designed to help businesses, help organizations, help teams achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve with a project, right? So it's a temporary, I like to call it a temporary mission. um, but if you don't have a person who understands at least the high level framework on how to manage projects, or how to manage like a Scrum sprint, or lessons learned session, backlog grooming, all of these things, you are going to keep going in circles. The average person, anybody who, I don't know, uh, 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 has gone through a business class will have an idea of how you manage an initiative. Very
Mhm.
helpful idea. But at the same time, you need to go, sometimes you need to go to a more granular level. You need to understand, okay, what do I do? If I started with a scope last week and all of a sudden this week, my boss tells me, oh, we're not doing that anymore. Like, we are completely changing the scope. So there is a process behind it. You're just not going to throw away all of your documentation. It's like, oh, now we're moving. No, there is a process behind it. You have to have sessions of lessons learned. You have to document why the change, who asked for it, why are we doing this, and you have to pivot.
Mhm.
Yes, in 2022 we are living in agile environments, hybrid environments, and we need to be able to adapt, learn our lessons, and iterate faster than what we used to in the 80s or in the 90s. And that's something that we experience every day in the corporate world. But even if we're moving fast, we need to make sure that we keep, like, I don't even know how to say this. We keep everybody accountable, and we maintain an organized chaos. Like, it could be chaos, but it's an organized chaos. We're going to
I
change
like
fast.
that.
We're going to pivot. Fine. We're going to do all of these, especially with startup. In startup environments, you're constantly learning. You're constantly having to change. You're constantly having to iterate your product. That happens, but it doesn't happen in a void. There are
Mhm.
reasons why that change happens and why we have to pivot. So you need to apply certain a certain level of knowledge on how to manage that. Because if not, then right, all you're gonna have is chaos, and not it's not gonna be organized. And
100%.
it's not scalable. Frameworks are created because they're scalable, and that's what you want to do as a small business, as a startup. You want to scale. You don't want to stay small for the rest of your product life, right? So
Mhm.
that's that's the reason behind frameworks. That's why you need project managers, scrum masters, because if not, anarchy, right? Within the organization, everybody thinks that everything is a priority. Everybody changes the focus every day, and we don't want that. We definitely don't want that.
And I think you basically brought it full circle, as in like you're the facilitator. You're facilitating all those conversations. You're facilitating all those stakeholders to make sure that everything falls in line. So before we close out, what are some books or any blogs that you would recommend for anyone that wants to take home with them on mastering productivity after this conversation?
That's a good question. But yes, let me see. If I have to recommend a book to someone that is trying to stay organized, learn a little bit about project management or Scrum, um, highly recommend the original Scrum book, which is Scrum, The Art of Doing the Work in Half the Time.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's a very good book, and even though it goes,
The title's catchy.
yeah, the title is catchy, and it honestly talks about, it purely talks about what this Scrum framework is. Um, it really gives you an idea from the from a normal person perspective, on how you can organize yourself. Like, it's designed for obviously technology projects and things like that. But when you look at that framework, you're like, you know what? I can do this for anything. Like, I can have a backlog, a to do in progress and finished, for your laundry, for your groceries, for any of that, right? So I would say that book is really good to look at. Um, Radical Candor, and I was actually talking to Nina the other day about this. I asked her, like, "Hey, have you read Radical Candor?" Even though it's been a couple of years since that book came
I've
out,
heard about that book.
but oh my god, if you haven't read it, you have to read it. Highly
Okay.
recommend, but not necessarily for any. or organizational tips, but more for how do you have difficult conversations? Because sometimes we shy away from telling people things the way they are because we want to soften the blow, right? Um, but sometimes people need to hear things even if they hurt them. Obviously, you're not. It's you're not going to be rude or anything like that. But there are ways to tell people um, what they're doing wrong and how they can improve without having to be mean. So,
That's a tough one.
oh, preach to the choir. Yes. um, so that's it, and obviously there's more in there about other communication styles and whatnot. So that's a really good book. And I think the last one, since you guys are, like in the startup world, the Lean Startup. Don't remember the name of the author right now. And I read this, like I would say, about 3 years ago. But the Lean Startup, it's also, another framework for staying agile and moving fast, iterating. So I would definitely recommend that one because it's like Scrum but in steroids. Um,
Yeah, you got to move fast when you're in startups for sure.
yes. So
Yeah,
the Lean Startup, it's a really good.
we can definitely relate.
Yeah, and I would say those are my three picks.
Awesome. Cool. I will definitely be adding those to my wish list to buy very soon. So that's it for us. Celimar, thank you for your time. Can't thank you enough. It was great to have you, and really we look forward to. We will continue to pick your brain throughout the coming months. So as always, we want to thank all of you for joining. We have more spaces to come. If you have any suggestions or feedback, feel free to tweet us at Buzzzy Inc. That's BUZZYINC. Thank you all again, and good night.
Thank you, guys.